Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving into a comprehensive guide on performance management, and we are really going to tear down the old school methods. For decades, the annual review has been this dreaded, purely numbers-driven chore. But what if we completely rewired that process? What if we turned it into a collaborative, continuous system designed to actually build people up? Well, let's find out. Here's our roadmap for today. We're going to look at the evolution of the concept, the balanced view, and who exactly does what when it comes to roles and responsibilities. Then we'll dive into continuous evaluation, how to manage the actual performance interview, and finally, how to navigate those really sensitive situations that can pop up in the room.
All right, starting with the evolution of performance management, because before we can fix the present, we really need to understand how our view of performance has drastically shifted over the years. Think back to the industrial age, roughly 1850 to 1975. The focus back then, purely on the product and the financial bottom line. Management was literally ignoring the customer entirely. Crazy, right? But jumping into the information age, that entire paradigm shifts. Suddenly, management is prioritizing human resources, innovation, and really cultivating deep customer relationships. We basically moved from valuing rigid, isolated procedures to valuing the adaptability and creativity of the actual people doing the work. And that massive historical shift, it completely changes modern metrics, leading us straight into our second topic, the balanced view of performance management. This source text heavily emphasizes this concept called the balanced general view. Evaluating an organization, or even a single employee today, means you absolutely have to look through four distinct, interconnected pillars. If you ignore even one of them, the entire system just becomes completely unstable. Now, this doesn't mean we just toss the financials out the window. The first lens is still the financial perspective. Things like ROI, profitability, capital turnover, and cost management, they still matter deeply. A business absolutely must remain financially viable to its stakeholders. But we have to balance that money with three other crucial pillars. First up, internal processes. This means maintaining really high quality and efficiency. Second is the customer perspective, actively tracking customer satisfaction and market share. And third, human learning and growth. This is all about evaluating our true commitment to continuous training, knowledge management, and innovation. A truly balanced system measures all four of these categories simultaneously.
Moving on to roles and responsibilities, because, we have to ask, who actually does what in this system?
Well, managing performance is a trio. It's definitely not a solo act. The institution lays the initial groundwork. They handle the strategic planning and set the general standards. Then, the manager steps in as a bridge, translating that high-level strategy into detailed, actionable goals while fostering real teamwork. And finally, the employee collaborates actively and takes true ownership of their own self-development and those goals. This setup totally removes that toxic manager versus employee stigma. The source explicitly stresses that performance management is something applied with the employee, not to them. The whole process is at its absolute best when it's a genuinely joint cooperative effort. So how does this actually work day to day? Let's get into the practical steps of continuous evaluation. The source uses the example of evaluating a teacher to really show what this looks like on the ground. Step 1 is planning routine check-ins. Step 2 is thoroughly documenting exactly what happened. And the text highlights some really specific evaluation methods here, like using graphic rating skills for standardized visual tracking, or the critical incidents method, where you log highly specific examples of exceptional work or even systemic violations. Finally, step 3, you have to provide immediate feedback so the employee actually has a chance to improve in real time. And that brings us to a major golden rule. Absolutely zero surprises. By conducting these continuous check-ins and using those critical incident logs we just mentioned, the baseline is already established. That means neither party is ever caught off guard when formal review time finally rolls around. Which perfectly transitions us into managing the actual performance interview itself. So, how do you successfully run this meeting? The text lays out some very clear steps. First, you absolutely have to meet face-to-face. Next, you cautiously review the employee's self-evaluation together. And you always want to explicitly focus on their strengths and achievements first. The ultimate goal here, agreeing on concrete steps for future training and self-development. You want the focus pointed firmly forward, rather than just lingering on past mistakes. But let's be real. What happens when the human element takes over? Let's talk about dealing with sensitive situations. The text asks us to consider a really tense scenario. Imagine you're giving a review, and the employee just completely shuts down. They stop participating and go totally silent. As a manager, what exactly are you supposed to do?
Well, silence doesn't usually mean agreement. The text notes that employee silence often stems from deep resentment, feeling suppressed, or perceiving some kind of hostility from the manager. To break the ice, the manager has to speak frankly and actively encourage them to talk. You have to remind them that the entire purpose of this review is strictly to resolve problems and help develop their skills. It's a safe space.
Now, what about an even more delicate situation? How should a manager respond if the pressure builds up and the employee is brought to tears right there in your office? The text advises a highly empathetic response here, warning that tears often come from a long history of suppressed feelings. Your strategy has to be de-escalation. Avoid placing full blame, stay silent, and just let them process their emotions without you getting flustered or angry. The source even recommends stepping out of the room to give them some privacy and ultimately postponing the meeting to a calmer time to protect their dignity. And all of this really brings us to the core philosophy that grounds this entire explainer. The text states, evaluating performance is nothing but addressing problems and developing the employee to achieve specific goals. You aren't a judge handing down a sentence. You are a coach, clearing obstacles to help them reach their highest potential.
So I want to leave you with this final, provocative thought for your own workplace. Is your performance management system actively building people up, or is it breaking them down? Because when you shift to a truly collaborative, empathetic process, you don't just change a meeting, you transform your entire organizational culture. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep learning, and I'll catch you next time.